All right. So this one is going to be about some specific monster design, and I'm going to go over a monster that I homebrewed like I think last year for Halloween, but the players didn't get to it till like 4 or 5 months later. And at that point, originally I designed it for our DM to use against the another party that was in the same game that I was playing in. It was like there were two parties in this campaign, so I homebrewed a monster for the other party, not other campaign. So this was because I made it around Halloween. It's like okay, let's make it kind of horror themed. There's like this mysterious monster. You don't know it's a monster. There's something murdering people in the middle of the night in this town that the party has just arrived at. So, and then from the DM perspective, it is the party has a few nights to figure out this murder mystery. If they every night that they don't figure it out, the monster gets bigger because it eats more people. And overall, it was like the party didn't really try very hard like to find it. They were just like, "Oh, this is something we should solve, but let's go get an in." Like, they always had something to do, and there wasn't like they failed a few. I think they load roll low rolled low on a few key rolls and missed some information, so they just kind of didn't solve it early enough. And in fact, they ended up fighting it at its final stage, in which it's the hardest. And I designed it to be able to fight against all three members of this party plus their two NPC companions. Now, the way it finally ended up was one, I got to control the monster, so that was a lot of fun for me. But the way it ended up happening was one of the players, the player that was playing the necromancy wizard, he had to drop out of the campaign completely because he just had a baby and jobs and bullshit. You know how it goes, adult stuff. So he had to drop out of the campaign, so they were down a player. And on top of that, they at this specific time they left their two NPC companions back at the inn to go to do other stuff. So it was just these two characters who were a wizard and a sorcerer, specifically a chronomancer wizard, the dumb one, and a draconic bloodline sorcerer. So not particularly hardy individuals. So, and in addition to that, originally it was I envisioned this fight taking place in like a big open, like a town square type area where they confront the monster in this open area with lots of room to maneuver. They didn't have that. They were inside of the mayor's leader of the town's like what do you call it? Keep, castle, estate's the word. Um, and it attacked them during a dinner. Oh, wait. What do you call it? I just got a message that distracted me. All right. Yeah. So they ended up fighting it, and because it was designed for more players, they kind of didn't stand a chance. So they ended up running away. Had this cool set piece where this big monster laid waste to tons of guards, and it ended up being really cool. And it kind of struck the horror vibes that I was going for, just because they were like kind of hopelessly outmatched in that kind of specific way. So, but as a result, some of the specific mechanics that I designed for it to like convey that kind of horror feel never came through. So I have it up and I'll display it, but it is here. Let me get rid of my face. Nope, wrong one. There we go. So I'll just go up here, right, right. Yeah, whatever. Good enough. Okay, so I named this weird monster the Dreadclaw. And specifically, the way it is supposed to work is this is the huge version of it. So it's when it's biggest, it has 13 AC, so really easy to hit. It's got a good amount of hit points, and in retrospect, it could have probably had more. But it has ways to heal itself and a lot of resistances. So like you kind of have to interact with its mechanics to be able to do real damage to it. So it kind of artificially has a lot more hit points. Um, and I'll just go through a lot of the properties it has. So it has 15-foot movement speed, meaning it's really slow. It just walks around instead of running like everybody else does. And here I did give it like I mathed out all its hit die and stuff, which is really unnecessary. All you really need to know for a lot of like monster design is just like, all right, I want its health in this range. And how big is it? Okay, it's huge. All right, its hit die is like a D12 or a D20. Good enough. Because sometimes there may be mechanics that interact with hit die. So, you know, but that's something you would know if the players have like a homebrewed weapon that does stuff to hit die or something. Then that's important information. But if not, that's not even something you need to know because you're not going to use it. Um, then specifically, I gave it like yeah, I think I gave it proficiency in strength, con, and intelligence saves. I don't remember why. In retrospect, I'd probably give it proficiency in wisdom saves too. Um, but because of some other features, that's not that big a deal. Um, it's resistant to poison damage. I just kind of threw that on there for no real reason. Just that I don't know. It's a big flesh monster. It's now the condition immunities were more important because it's immune to frighten, charm, poisoned, and stun condition. And I probably should have given it a immunity to being paralyzed and one or two other things. But I for I just didn't do that for whatever reason. But the main point behind these immunities is because this monster is unstoppable. It will never stop moving towards you if you're its target. Horror monster vibes. It has blind sight because it smells your blood. It's kind of it's kind of whatever. Um, Low passive perception. I gave it a challenge rating just because you're supposed to fill it in, and I don't even know if it's actually challenge rating 11. I didn't even bother because those are all rough estimates anyway that don't work super well. Um, so I find it's better to like you have to have a more inherent feel for the monster. Like you can run it through a calculator to figure out what the CR is and gives you a rough idea. But so the main properties or the main things that do the most work on this monster are this ability, Incomplete Ward, which basically means it has advantage against on any saving throw against magic, and it has resistance to physical damage that don't strike it from the front. So you have to be in this monster's face to be able to do normal damage to it. And then it can eat people. And it regains an amount of HP. And the more people it eats, the bigger it gets. So that there are some mechanics in place so that you can start it from a small, like a medium version, and it'll graduate to large and then to huge, which is this version. Then specifically, it's got multi-attack, all monsters do at this point. It can use its roar or its dread stare. Dread stare is a specific one, and the roar is a little homebrewed. And then it can make two attacks: one with its right claw, one with its left, or two with its right claw. The right claw is like a normal kind of attack, like it has normal to hit range, and it does a normal amount of damage. It doesn't even do that much damage. It could probably do more. Um, And then the left claw it has a reduction. It's only +3 to hit, but I actually might have wanted to make it less, like make it a negative value to hit because it's so slow. But the idea behind this attack would be it's such a big, meaty claw and it does such absurd damage. but it's slow and easy to dodge. But this specifically interacts with its Dread Stare ability, which is it focuses on a single target. They have to make a Wisdom save or be paralyzed. Then I think, I think at the start of their turn, yeah, at the start of their turn they can repeat it. Now, when they, depending on how high above the save that they pass, or their exact value changes what happens. So if they fail the DC, they're paralyzed. If they just meet the DC, but they otherwise just completely lose their turn, but they're not paralyzed, so that's good. But they're stuck in place for another round. Then if they beat the DC by like 1 to 4, then their speed is reduced to 0, but they can still take their turn. So if they have alternate movement options, they can get away. Resources they might need to burn, they can get away. Um, in fact, I might have changed this so that like not their speed is reduced to 0, and instead they use all of their normal movement to not be paralyzed or something, or just word it, but they can still take the dash action, do something like that, so they can still get away if they burn a dash action, or they can use like Misty Step or something like that to get away. But then if they beat it by 5 or more, then they just pass normally and nothing happens. So the way this specifically interacts is this monster would stare at you and paralyze you, and then it slowly moves over to you and annihilates you with its left claw, which at this range and there's the player's specific health thresholds, um, the left claw, while they're paralyzed, would auto crit and do double damage, and on average would one shot each of the party members. But specifically, there are some other caveats in place. Like the Dread Claw is a concentration ability, so other players could help. Um, if the actual target of it, say it passes it by a little bit, so they lose their movement, but they do gain. They can still act normally. If they hit it hard enough and break its concentration, well, then they can move normally. But the issue there is that this thing has a huge con modifier, so you got to do a shit ton of damage to be able to bring this thing, the DC for a concentration check, up high enough that it could possibly fail, and then it has to roll low. So it's really hard to break. Um, but that specifically works in tandem with its legendary actions. Now, I gave this one 5 legendary actions, but normally it's 3. But you can give them however many legendary actions as you want. You just have to make the things they can do with them cost certain amounts. So, for example, a right claw attack, it just takes 1 action. So as long as there's people around it, it can make 5 extra right claw attacks. That's nasty. It's it's constantly making all these extra claw attacks. It can make a Dread Stare with 3 actions, so it can only do 1 extra one of these per round. But then it also has the ability Pursue. This one's really specific, that it can move up to 10 feet towards the focus of its Dread Stare. And the idea behind this is once it has a player paralyzed in place, it will, at the end of every turn, every other player's turn, advance towards them, creating that like feeling of dread. I never got a chance to see if it actually works, but that is the intention. Then also going back, the roar ability is slightly different. It's still a roar, big area, and you make a DC 14 Wisdom save, or you're frightened of the Dreadclaw till the Dreadclaw's next turn. But so it only lasts one round. But when you are frightened of the creature in this way, your speed is reduced to 0, so it prevents everyone around it from moving. to kind of drive home that that you can't get away from this thing. I also gave it siege because reasons. Then it also has a few other specific abilities. It has this barbed claw bonus action that whenever it attacks a target with its right claw, and or whenever it hits a target with its right claw, actually I have to change the wording of that specifically because of that reason. Because all it says here is that it attacks. That means if it misses, it could do this too. So it should be if it hits. But the idea is that anything it hits with its right claw, it can then grapple and keep you in front of it. Then also I gave it this other ability, Crushing Leap. And I think originally I had this on a recharge, but instead what it does is it has a minimum range of 90 feet. So the whole point of this ability is if the player characters get too far away, it just jumps at them. And theoretically, I might make this. I didn't put too much thought into this. It was kind of a very last minute addition because I also needed a way for the Dreadclaw to like jump around in town and move around quickly. So I just kind of gave it this. But what I would probably do here is make this a bonus action like activation ability where um, it uses a bonus action to like tense up into a jumping stance and then either like as a legendary action or on its next turn it can jump, but I would still give it this minimum range property where like the whole point there is if the players stay close enough it won't use this, but if it gets too far it can close the distance instantly. um, Then I also gave it this devour trait that it can consume unconscious, important, or dead creatures it has grappled, or just dead creatures within 5 feet of it. So if there's an unconscious player on the ground next to it, it can't just eat them. It has to grapple them first, then it can eat them. But if they're dead, it can just eat them. And when it does that, it recovers HP equal to blah blah blah. And for every creature, 12 creatures of a size smaller than its own size, 3 creatures of its own size, or one creature one size larger than it currently is can grow one stage larger. And huge is this creature's maximum size, which is what this stat block is. Um, then I've got some basic descriptions, and this was more for the DM than anything else. Like, I would have mostly known this, but this kind of stuff is useful because you can put down like what is this monster's intended strategy and how is this monster supposed to work. Um, so I just gave some flavoring descriptions. There's a basic picture, and that's just concept art from Dead Space, and it's close enough. But like I've got some basic descriptions here. It's like leaking blood out of its big claw. When it uses the Dread Stare or the Roar ability, its face splits in half and this glyph shows up and projects light, and that's what paralyzes you. But that's all flavor stuff. And then there's this little bit that announces a little bit of strategy, and then a little bit of information for like the large and small and medium versions of it. Like, yeah, like compared to it, the large version has less HP, a little more speed, and lower stats. Lower stats, a little higher AC, and it has less legendary actions. And then the medium version, it has even less HP, more speed, lower general stats, but higher AC, and no legendary actions, and it loses the incomplete ward and roar action, but it still has the Dread Stare action. So, and I'll link the stat block in the description of this video, but you do need a D&D Beyond account to actually just view the stat block itself. And I'll update this a little bit, just clean up the language. I'm not sure if I'm going to change the Crushing Leap. Um, um, Yeah, I might make it so it's like essentially an auto like ready action that um like as an action it preps and then like a few turns or like at the start of its next turn it does this attack, but then it can take the rest of its turn normally. So it jumps and then can take a turn. Yeah, that's probably how I'll word it. But and I'll change this that even magical weapons don't get through this incomplete ward because I have it as non-magical weapons. But and I'll add extra immunities and stuff and clean it up a little bit. But otherwise, this is mostly the version that is I consider like functional. Again, I haven't used it in its like real proper context where it's a larger party that have to actually kill it. Instead, the players just ran from it. But uh, yeah, I hope it would work essentially effectively. But this is how you can use like certain mechanics to influence players' decisions, and especially this one, it goes with the spirit of horror, and you start fighting it like obviously ideally you start this at long range so your spellcasters and ranged people can start slinging spells at it. And then unless it's staring directly at you, the arcane ward activates. So even like you've got three players in a line, like even right next to each other in three squares, and it's staring at the middle character, those two on the sides would not hit it. Would they would get their attacks resisted. So um, to drive home like you can only damage it if it's staring at you. So like this magical ward has a very small blind spot right in front of it. And I might clean up that language a little bit, but again, not super important. Yeah, I'll include a description or a link to this in the description, and yeah, there we go.